Thank you, and a pleasure to be here. I think I'll be about as rapid fire as Paul as well. So let's see how we go. So a few disclosures there. Nothing dramatic. Haven't worked for industry for a little while, but occasionally I do. So a few snapshots to start with. It's always good to look at the WHO data that comes through. So as of the middle of September or so, we see 770 million confirmed cases, nearly 7 million deaths. The fact is the confirmed cases are actually an underestimate. So really our case fatality rate is probably below 0.5%, which is less than flu actually by the time Omicron has now come along. And the Australian data shows something similar. 11 million cases and 23,000 deaths to date. It's also good to look at seroprevalence studies. They give us a snapshot of antibodies, and we see England, Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Australia have done reasonably good work, mainly on blood bank data and children as well. And this reflects not only vaccination, but also natural infection. And interestingly, in Australia, it's 98% because our vaccination rates have been incredibly high. So this data is about a year ago. And also, very interestingly, at least 64% of 0 to 19-year-olds have been infected with COVID-19, looking at other more specific antibodies. So this virus has really gone through the community. And as we know, many people have had the infection several times. All right, so it's also good to get a little snapshot of the clinical course. Things haven't really changed particularly much there. We know in the first part, there's viral replication. Then we get the innate immune responses, the cellular immune responses, and possibly severe disease if these cellular immune responses are slow. And of course, they're slower in older people or those with immunocompromised conditions. So they have a higher risk of having significant sequelae. Many will have poor neutralizing antibodies. Antibody wanes, as we know, that can lead to reinfection. And that waning, depending on the literature you read, could be 8 weeks to 12 weeks. It starts to go. And some people, of course, get a post-COVID syndrome or long COVID or a long cold has also been reported now. We know we can use antivirals in the first part. We can use immunomodulators as the disease goes on. We can use prophylactic antibodies early and therapeutic antibodies a bit later. So all these are available for treatment as well. We've got PCR tests and RAT tests for diagnosis. The RAT tests are useful for about 7 days. The PCR tests for much longer, including prior to the onset of fever in the initial part of the infection. So long COVID. Again, just one slide. We know that persistent virus can lead to chronic inflammation and immune dysfunction in particular, and it can and will infect the brain, the lung, cardiovascular system, and GI tract. It's interesting, some of the data coming through now, very, very clearly showing that over 25% of people with long COVID have GI problems. So that's something that we can look to in the future as being a marker. There's also a paper out this week showing there are, in fact, now biomarkers for long COVID. So we can now do lab tests. These have yet to be approved, but from what I've read, I'm pretty confident that these will be of great value. Treatments. We know about Paxlovid and Molnupiravir. Now, both of them are useful, but the Paxlovid is really only useful, or more useful, I should say, for people over the age of 70, but you have to be careful of contraindications. And that is, several pages on the TGA website, so I'll refer you to that. It's really important to look up. But of course, the other product, Molnupiravir, is available. It isn't as efficacious, but it isn't bad either. So I wouldn't necessarily not use it just because Paxlovid might be better. It's certainly better in the older person. Now, I wanted to briefly touch on two really important recommendations. The first one from WHO. So they've really made these two recommendations, which I believe will have a significant impact on Australia's response to the COVID pandemic, particularly for next winter. And the first one is the end of the global health emergency. So the end of the global health emergency. So this is good news in the sense that WHO has declared that the COVID-19 global health emergency status of the virus is now over. And WHO pointed to the dramatic drop in the global death rate from 100,000 a week now to 3,500 a week as a main reason for its decision. But the other reason is that we're now with Omicron, which is far less severe, and its various subvariants. And we are getting more and more subvariants due to natural mutation as the virus replicates, becomes more humanized or adapted to humans, so to speak. And there's absolutely no need to continuously catastrophize every appearance or every iteration of a new subvariant, as the press like to do in social media and so on. We also now have the rise of hybrid immunity. We've got vaccination plus natural infection. Because we have that, we are getting much better immunity in the population. I wouldn't call it herd immunity yet, but we're on the way. But WHO has made it very, very clear that while the emergency designation has ended, the pandemic still exists. We should not let down our guard. I like the slide Paul had previously about non-pharmaceutical interventions. These are still critical. And it's really important to keep educating the community, beginning with 5-year-olds, on the importance of hygiene, in my view. We also know that the pandemic will not end soon. And I think this is important to understand. We're in a state, or a position rather, where we're going to have a steady state condition or steady state infection of COVID virus going through the community for some time. The second recommendation is to shift back to monovalent vaccines. So it wasn't that long ago that ATAGI recommended bivalent vaccines, as did many other groups around the world, but this is absolutely the wrong way to go. And now the move is going to go back to monovalent vaccines. It'll be some strain of XBB. From the Omicron group. And there are a couple of good reasons for this. One, that by adding another virus to the vaccine, particularly viruses that are no longer circulating, really doesn't make sense. I must say, as a virologist, immunologist, I've got no idea why people wanted to do that. I really had to scratch my head, because it leads to the next point of immune imprinting, where the immune system's response to the previously encountered antigens reduces the response to new antigens. So we're going to go back to monovalent vaccines. I'm really pleased that WHO has made that decision. So what about our vaccination program in Australia? It's really important that everyone over 75, I'm now quoting from ATAGI, and those in high risk groups get boosters around about every 6 months. And that vulnerable people and those with complex needs take sensible precautions, particularly any of those who are in closed or poorly ventilated spaces. Those non-pharmaceutical interventions are still important. High-risk groups will gain the most from receiving a booster, and vaccines for the vulnerable, masks, etc., are all still important in our response. However, it's also important for those adults and others in high-risk groups with immune problems get regular boosters every 6 months. What does ATAGI actually say? Well, there's a very nice table they've put together worth looking at. If you look at no risk factors, people with no risk factors here, it's actually not recommended except for those over 65 where they can consider it, and it is recommended for those over 75. So things are changing. And this is a good thing, really, because Omicron is almost a vaccine virus, in my view. It's causing such mild disease in general for the healthy person under 75 that it's questionable or debatable whether one should get constant vaccines. I know the companies won't like me for saying that. I do apologise in advance. But for those at risk, and this is where, of course, where we do need the vaccines and we do need our companies, absolutely. Under 5, under 17, not recommended. Consider 18 to 64. There is the issue of myocarditis, of course, in some of those age groups. Consider for 65 to 74, and absolutely recommended for those over 75. So what about vaccine platforms? What's available? We know we've got mRNA, viral vectored, we used to use recombinant protein are available. They've all got basically the same demonstrated impressive, very impressive efficacy and safety. But WHO has warned that for the individuals that are under 50, particularly under 30, there's really no great additional benefit in the sense they consider it to be uncertain. We know protein vaccines offer various advantages if preferred by the patient, because simply you get heterologous immunity, and they also perform better in terms of what's the word? Cold chain. Good. Just a few concluding remarks. Clearly, we need second-generation vaccines. I'm pleased to say the Doherty Centre, who I've been on a project advising them on their new protein receptor binding domain vaccine, is going to be published in The Lancet. This is the way to go. We need to get very much more specific and accurate vaccines that will give us more long-term immune response and will ideally stop transmission. Of course, we're going to have mRNA, and they've been great. Self-amplifying mRNA is coming. More recombinant and nanoprotein vaccines are coming. Some intranasal are coming, and so on. And we need to make sure the adverse reactions are fairly mild, but we also need to ensure that those under 30 getting these mRNA platforms need to be aware of the risks. So there will be, the COVID vaccines must gain acceptance. I think this is important. We've lost it a bit in the community. Do a simple pub test. People don't want to take these vaccines anymore. But a combination COVID flu rather than concomitant might be the answer to that. And annual vaccination would be a good idea as well, rather than biannual, except for those that are at risk. Monoclonal antibodies are available. Better antiviral drugs are needed, although the ones we have are pretty good. And of course, we've got the threat of flu, COVID, HMPV and RSV that are going to circulate every winter, and that too will be a challenge. Thank you.